All right, so hope you're feeling pretty good about everything, and we've made it pretty far in this ES6 course, and it's pretty good explanation of let, const, var keywords, as well as functions, hoisting, and template strings. If you're coming into this sort of late, you might as well check out the rest of the playlist, especially if you stumble across this video. And if you're interested in the group, check out javascriptla.net for all the information about us. I'm your speaker, Vijay, hosting this course. And then essentially, if you want to find out more about me, I'm going to have a card here at some point that basically explains who I am, as well as what the group is and how to follow us. If you want the slides to this particular video, they're at slides.com/javascriptla/guide to ES6. And they're also available in this video on the description. Okay, so we're going to talk about arrow functions now. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file. And this time, I'm actually going to do it in the terminal. So I'm going to say touch arrow functions.js. And the touch command essentially gives me the ability to create a file without having to go manually and do a new file. Although all the commands are pretty short, so I think it doesn't matter what you do as long as you just create a new file. I'm just going to do it through the command line. If touch doesn't work for you, you may need to download it and install it using some kind of package manager. And I'll have a separate card at some point that basically explains how to do that for Windows possibly. But again, if you have git bash, you should probably have some of these commands available to you. So now that I have that available, I can basically just start looking at it. Go over to File, Open, and let's see here. I'm going to go over to my folder, Arrow Functions, and there it is. Okay. So now I'm going to create a arrow function. So we already talked about function expressions and function declarations. So arrow functions work the same way as function expressions. First you create the variable, and then you define the function inside that will be set to the variable. So let's do that. So using the code that I have here, I have the first one here says let greetName is equal to name, and then fat arrow function, and then a template string of hello name. So I'm going to do that here too. So let greetName equal to name arrow function, and then hello plugin syntax name. Okay. So you might be wondering, this looks really strange. Why does it look so different from what we've been doing all along? And so arrow functions are really, a popular topic for a lot of people coming into JavaScript, especially people who have done ES5 for a long time. It kind of throws them off seeing this simple syntax. It's weird, it's confusing, right? So when you look at normal functions, right, especially coming from possibly this, right, where it looks more, strict, and it looks more precise, right? This is like what happened? What happened to my parentheses? What happened to my brackets? And so I'll tell you, essentially in ES6 with a fat arrow function, you don't need parentheses anymore if you just have a single parameter, right? So if you have a single parameter, it's the same as just doing this. But you can get rid of all of this now and just say name. And JavaScript will know you mean, okay, just name. And that's your only parameter. And then when you have a fat arrow function, it just says, oh, okay, so everything after the fat arrow function is basically the body of the function. And if you don't specify any brackets and you don't specify a return value, by default, this is the return value. So going back from this, right, I don't need this anymore, and I only have these parameters, and then I don't need this entire bracket statement, and just return back whatever. So we'll do these, and I'll make it a little bit easier to follow with time. So if I put in greetName and I put my own name here, Vijay, then I run node arrow functions. I'm gonna hit tab till it complete. Hello Vijay comes back. So you see that this JavaScript function this ES6 function works pretty well. Like I don't have to like write out a whole bunch of syntax, and that's really the point. Again, I said this in a previous video, but the whole idea is to make it so that as you code, you are doing less menial and boring tasks, and a lot of the stuff that you're trying to do, you know, that you want to do in your own mind, right? Like if you want to like do a lot of work, you know, you might think, okay, well, I can do it this way, or I can, you know, learn something from the way I've been doing it for years and then automate part of that process. So then when I go and do the work, like the rest of it is abstracted away, and I know I can count on the, you know, program itself to take care of those boring, tedious tasks so I can do more higher level work. I mean, that's how it works for everything. When you are a kid, you know, you don't really know how to speak English or maybe like a language, but as you start learning the language, you basically make abstractions, and then you don't have to completely say long sentences over and over and over again to explain your point. You can replace them instead with, you know, shorter words, right? I don't have to explain to you that a cake is made of butter and, you know, egg and flour and all that stuff. I can just simply say cake, and then you get, oh, that's what cake is, right? Like your brain processes all of that for you automatically. That's the same idea, and that's the way code is always going to go, in that direction. You know, with time, we may be at some point where we don't need to even type JavaScript. We can just type plain English, and the computer will know, oh, this is what you probably mean, and it'll break it down abstractions. It's still kind of a far off future, but you know, realize that that is sort of like the end goal for a lot of like the people who work on these kind of like programming languages. They want to make it closer and closer to human thought, and then abstracted thought. And then basically when you say, oh, you know, hello Siri, go do this, it basically knows what to do, right? And so you don't have to like sit there and like give it like step by step commands. Okay, so that's all that's happening here. So all right, so back to this. What if I have two parameters, right? So I'm going to move this up actually, and I'm going to say let's look at my next example here. Oh, by the way, this is the old way of writing it in ES5. I would have to write it like this, and then I could console. And keep in mind too, like when I create a variable called greetName, I can only call it after I've defined the function, and it's the same with expression syntax. Okay, so here's another example. This one is a summation function, so we'll do that. So I'll say sum is equal to parentheses x and y, and then I'm going to just say x plus y. Okay, so here I'm essentially saying I have more than one parameter now, so I need to have parentheses for JavaScript to be able to distinguish these are two different parameters. But the idea is that I'm still returning x plus y. So let's use it. So I'll do console.log sum 1 and 2, save, and then again run the function. So there's my hello Vijay, and then 3. Again, really simple, really straightforward. I can't call sum before I've defined it, just so I reiterate that point home. That's going to throw me an error. I want you to see errors so you're able to like realize, oh, if you make this mistake on your own, you know how to fix it. So I'm going to bring this back down here. And let's go on to the next one. So what if I want to, you know, have like brackets? What if I want to, let's move this out of the way. It's a little bit in my way, actually. Maybe I can, yeah, scroll up. Okay, that'll work. All right, so scroll up. All right, so before I get to, well, actually I'll get to this one. So what if I want to have my, you know, my bracket still? What if I want to have more than one line, you know? Like, what do I do then? So what I can do is, let's say, you know, I want to do some kind of like mutation essentially with my function, right? Where mutation basically means take whatever I passed it and then, you know, modify it and then return it as a modified value. So let's say change name, right? And so in this case, I'm going to do one parameter again, but this time I'm going to return a bigger block. So I'm going to say name is now equal to name times 2, right? And then I want to return name. Okay, so let's take a look and see what that does for me. And I need to console log. And let's go ahead and run node. Okay, so I get back not a number. So let's take a look and see what happens. Let's see if I add 1. I get Vijay1. So this is some really basic fundamental stuff, right? So you might be wondering, why did we get not a number? Well, you can't multiply a string by a number in JavaScript because they're of 2 different types. If you try to do that, then JavaScript will not use type coercion, which it does by default here. So if I add 1 to a string, it thinks, oh, you just want to add the value of 1 as a string to the value of my name, which is also a string. And so it forces a coercion of string. And so I get Vijay1. But when I try to multiply, right, then essentially it says this is a number and this is a string. And so I'm not going to coerce this into Vijay. It works like that in Python. So that's probably why I was thinking of doing it that way. But in JavaScript, you can't multiply a number by a string. So, all right. So basically that kind of gives you some, that's an example of how you would have like a longer bracket statement, right? And you can easily turn this code. Let's see here. Maybe I don't have any long code. Well, I could probably turn a lot of this code, right? The function stuff that I wrote in template functions right here. Like I could turn this into an arrow function if I wanted to. I could just, oops. Let's bring that back. Okay, that was odd. I could basically turn this into an arrow function and I could just do this instead, right? And this would work just as well. In fact, let's take a look and just make sure that it still works. Yep, template functions. Okay, there you go. So it's still working perfectly. So the difference is I drop the function keyword and then I have the arrow syntax. So that denotes anything that follows is basically the function body, and the function body is also augmented by these brackets because this is a multi-line fat arrow function. So those are the things that you want to keep in mind. Lastly, let's take a look at multi-line return statements. So this is different from a multi-line function body, which is denoted by brackets, right? If I have multiple lines on my function, then I need brackets. But if I know that, you know, I just want to return one thing, right? So let's say we'll just do the same thing again, change name. And I'll call it change name to, say name, and this time I want to use parentheses syntax. Well, this basically means that I can have a very long return statement. You know, I could basically say down here, all right, name plus 1, right? And let's take a look and see what that looks like. And actually, I'm going to show you a more better example too, because I know that that was kind of a little bit too easy. So I'm just going to say Vijay again right here, save, and I'm going to do node, arrow functions, and then you get back not a number because that comes from above over here. It's still multiplying, but down here you can see that this is Vijay1, and so this is a multi-line return statement. I can have like multiple lines in here, save, and then just run this again, and it'll still give me Vijay1. So this is an easy way of doing this. But you might see sometimes like people do this kind of stuff, right? Like especially if you use a framework like React. So they'll return you know, a list item with some list, or maybe like you know, multiple stuff in here, name, or like most people will probably use like an address. So address line 1, and then address line 2. And of course, I'm butchering my spelling, but you can ignore that. Basically, you get the point. Like in React, they'll use this kind of syntax, so they'll return back, you know, JSX which is just JavaScript essentially, but gets turned into, it looks like HTML, but it turns into JavaScript functions that execute HTML commands. I can only use this syntax as long as I'm using React, by the way. It won't work in normal JavaScript, but you get the idea. There's some times where you might want to have like multi-line return statements. So the difference between this and a bracket is that the bracket is for just the body, whereas this is for the return statement. So keep those in mind. All right, with that said, that completes like this particular section about arrow functions. I hope you found it useful, and I'll see you in the next video.